Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Asian Swordsmanship Fencing Theory series. So this is just going to be an ongoing series where we explore different fencing theory concepts, especially how they apply to Asian swordsmanship. And if you haven't seen the previous episode, then I really recommend that you do, because it goes through why fencing theory is important. And in today's episode, we're going to go through doubles. So as with everything, then this is my opinion. This is fencing theory as I understand it. And I might be wrong. So if you have a different opinion, if you think I've missed something, I'd really like to know. So please let me know down in the comments. And I hope that this can act as a segue to open the discussions so that we can all learn from each other, and we can all walk away from this as better coaches, better fencers, and better swordsmen. So let's start with what is a double. So a double is an exchange where two swordsmen come in, they fight each other, and they both land a hit on each other in one exchange. And the historical context of this is that both people die, or both people get injured, and that's really not a good thing. But I think in the modern day and age, when we fight with HEMA gear and we don't use sharps and we don't kill each other, which is a good thing, then we've gotten a little bit more okay with getting hit, to the point where some fencers have started chasing landing a hit, even as that risk of getting hit slowly creeps up. And I think that's a really bad thing. So I think that in doubles, then how you approach doubles changes the decision making that you take, and it changes how you approach fencing in its entirety. And I think good fencing looks like fencing where people try to avoid doubles and they try to make sure that they stay safe first. Because if we're talking about the historic context of swordsmanship that we are all practicing, then I think staying safe is the priority, and landing a hit is something that you do when you know that you can be safe. So I hope you can see why being hit is a bad thing, and that's hence why doubles are not a good thing, because you've landed a hit at the cost of being hit. There is a caveat to that, which is armoured fencing, and there are certain armoured manuals, Asian historic swordsmanship armoured manuals where they talk about techniques where you have a very high risk of being hit, but you can land a devastating hit back. And the context of these are usually where you're in armour and the people that you're fighting aren't in armour. And therefore a double is actually a good thing, because you can wear a hit on your armour and not be injured and kill the other person. But I think that's a caveat, and that's a small niche that most of us don't train in. I think the bulk of what we do and the bulk of what we train in is trying to simulate unarmoured fencing where everywhere is a target. And in that context, in a time before antibiotics, then even a small cut could lead to infection, could lead to amputation, could even lead to death. And therefore being hit at all was a really, really bad thing. So I'd like to pose a question of who is at fault in a double. And I'd like to look at this in a couple of ways, and the first is looking at outcomes, and the second is looking at decisions made by the fencers. So let's first start with outcomes, and there's a few ways that you can look at outcomes. So let's talk first about sequentiality. So whose cut lands first? And they say that whoever's cut lands first is probably in the right. And I don't think that's completely true, because let's take a case where you've got one fencer who makes a well-structured attack at a deep target. So let's say they're going for the other person's head. And that person, in return, makes a very fast whippy cut to the hands, which lands first because it's closer, because they move faster, for whatever reason. Is the person who cut the hands making a good decision? Were they at fault here? I kind of think they are at fault, because I think the decision that they should have made is that they should have defended. But instead, then they chose to attack and wore a devastating blow in return. I don't think that's a good outcome. And I don't think that, especially if that was thrown very late on in the exchange, then I don't think the person who was making that deep target attack to the head probably could have changed their line. And then I also hear some people say, oh well, but if you hit them on the arms first, then they would drop their sword. And they talk about the outcomes of whether someone would drop their sword or die instantly. And a note on that one, I've been in the medical field for about 9 years now, and I'm fairly confident in my anatomy knowledge. I've worked in many emergency departments, seen a lot of trauma. I cannot look at an exchange and tell you if that's going to be a fight-stopping exchange. I genuinely cannot. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Big reason is the human body is very complicated. there are going to be bits in the body where if you cut them, and it might seem like a very innocuous cut, like a cut to the arm, it might cut some nerves. You might not be able to use that arm no matter how strong you are, and there's nothing that you can do about that. And there might be other blows where you get thrust through the chest and people say, well, he would have died. You actually can survive some of those, and sometimes you can survive them pretty well. And I think if a cut or a thrust is 5mm too shallow, 5mm more towards the inside or to the outside, then it changes a lot of things. And just watching an exchange, especially in the 2 seconds afterwards where I've got to judge and make a call, I don't think I can say whether it's going to be a fight-stopping exchange. And I see a lot of HEMA coaches on the internet, they say that, oh, this would have been a fight-stopping exchange, and they say it with such confidence. But I think if they had a little bit more anatomy knowledge, if they knew a little bit more about the physics of sword fighting, they'd probably take back that confidence and they'd probably not be so sure in their answer. So I don't think we can judge fight-stopping exchanges or outcomes based on postulations and theories. I just don't think you can. So I don't think judging by sequentiality is a good way. Let's talk about some other ways. So we see right of way being thrown around in competition rule sets, where if you start making your attack first, then you have right of way, and therefore if you land an attack even in a double, then your attack was better, and therefore the point goes to you. And I think it's not terrible. I think it's got some point to it, but then you get these cases where somebody has made a structured defense, or they've put their sword in a position where their sword is quite threatening to the opponent, and yet the opponent still just lunges in and makes a suicidal attack and throws themselves onto their sword to land a hit. And in that case, then they have moved first, they have started their attack first, so they have right of way. But was it a good decision for them to make that attack? I really don't think so. And I don't think anyone who has a self-preservation mindset would have made that attack. And then we get to the other side of competition formats, which is the afterblow. So if you throw an attack and then you get hit in return, then you get some points negated, or sometimes if it's to a deeper target, then you get the point completely annulled. And I don't think this is a very good rule set, because I think it rewards people trying to land a hit after they've been hit, and it doesn't really pay attention to the person not trying their best to defend. And I think it's a good rule set if people are forced to defend first and then make an afterblow, but an extreme example of gaming afterblow rule sets would be if I make no attempt at all to defend myself, I wear a hit, and I just try and hit the other person back in exchange. And I've actually done this. I've done an experiment where I've tried to defend someone and said, my goal is to land an afterblow or hit you, and your goal is to hit me without being touched. And paying completely no mind to defense, as soon as they hit me, then I try and hit them on a completely different line where their sword isn't, and if they're trying to take a distance attack, then I try and throw a one-handed fling to their legs or something stupid like that. And 100% of the time, I can land an afterblow, or land a double in those cases as well. So I think that gaming those systems is a possibility, and it leads to really bad fencing. I don't think it really rewards good decision making in the first place. So then we get to a different way of seeing how do we judge fencing. And I think that we should be judging fencing based on the decisions, if that hadn't become clear already from my issues with judging people on outcomes. And how do you judge people on decisions? I think you have to judge people on who wins structure first. So in the case of the person who's thrown a structured attack and the other person hits them somewhere else, that's a failure to defend. The person who's won the structure first in making a good structured attack has won the fencing decision. They've made the better decision, and the person who's on the other side of that has failed to make a good decision because they failed to defend an attack coming hurtling towards them. In another case where you've got a person who's got a structured defense set up and then someone suicidally jumps onto that to attack that, then the defender has won structure first, and the attacker has chosen to make a really poor decision by ignoring that and committing suicide essentially, and taking down the defender with them. And that way then I think that you reward better fencing decisions, and you can judge fencing better. And in turn, as you fence, hopefully you can make better decisions as you try to chase winning structure first, rather than chasing hitting your opponent. So I think we can classify doubles in 3 different ways, and this sort of gives a picture for, in a double, it's a good framework for deciding who's at fault. The first type of double is where both people attack simultaneously and they both strike each other. And in that case, I honestly think it's just bad luck. I don't think anyone's really at fault. At slow speeds, you could argue that, one or both of them should have abandoned their attack to choose defense instead. And I think that is the ideal situation. But at higher speeds, then the attack speeds, especially if you're both closing in, comes very close to the margin of reaction speed, sometimes being even shorter. So I just think that that's bad luck. And probably, historically, we have a lot of accounts where people died in duels where both died in a double. And I don't think they would have been trying to chase a double. I think this is probably the more likely situation where it happened. Let's go to the second type of double. So the second type of double is where somebody has clearly won structure first, whether that be in a structured attack or in a structured defense. And then the other person has chosen to ignore that structure and then kill themselves while trying to chase a hit. And in that point, the person who didn't have structure first has made a poor fencing decision, and it's absolutely their fault. Now, a note of this one is if somebody makes a well-structured attack and the defender takes a step back and makes a well-structured defense, but the attacker continues their attack and elongates their attack, then they actually haven't won structure first, because them winning structure first is moot because the defender has stepped back and made a well-structured defense, and they've chosen to ignore that and elongate their attack. So it does get messy sometimes, but I think that trying to judge fencing decisions and intentions is really important in this case. In the third type of double, then that's where somebody intentionally throws a double. And I think historically this probably wouldn't have happened because you get to do it once and then you die, but in HEMA competitions you get to win gold medals somehow. But I think that this just really should be avoided, and we shouldn't see this in our fencing. You should be trying not to do that. But it's really important to be mindful about it, especially when you're making competition rule sets, so that you make a rule set that can't be gained by people who are thinking like this. So I hope that that brings about a different idea about doubles. Doubles are bad, and that we should be trying to chase structure in our fencing, and that if we make decisions leading to good structure, then hopefully we can make some rule sets and judge fencing that rewards that, rather than judging fencing purely based on the outcomes. But that's my opinion. Now I want to hear about yours. So let me know down in the comments what you think, and let me know if you want any other topics in this series. So with that, I'll see you next time.